So one of the key things which I will just briefly mention is if you look at the how the assessment is to be done for this unit. Normally they say AC LO1, which is learning outcome 1, presentation 10 minutes. So assuming you spend 1 minute per slide, 2 minutes per slide, you're looking at between 5 to 10 slides. That gives you a bit of an idea. Now it says approximate word count, and obviously 3,500, which means plus minus 10%. But don't worry about this. This is just an indicator or a suggested word count. It could be as detailed as possible, and there is no restriction at levels when we are doing assignments. Okay, now let's get back to the unit. So obviously, so far, when we look at this particular unit, leadership and management development, we've covered 2 learning outcomes. First learning outcome talks about, in which we covered the key concepts of leadership, different leadership theories across the 3 different eras. We looked at the difference, what makes a leader, a manager, difference in terms of leadership traits and skills. We also looked at a bit more detail in terms of the additional PowerPoint slides for management theories and leadership theories. And then we went into understanding the differences between what is the difference between when you say you're a coach or you're a mentor, in what situations we look at coaches, or in certain organizations, sometimes when you're working in the working in a particular job role, you are asked to coach or mentor people or staff within the organization. Differences what are the differences between the two, and how does organization look at integrating learning and development as a wider strategy within the organization. So we looked at the concept of self-managed learning, and we also looked at the concept of lifelong learning. So here the idea is that when you look at leaders being developed, or skills being developed within leaders and managers, they have to look at the process of learning and development. And sometimes at the senior level, this process of learning and development is primarily self-managed. That means you manage your own learning. You do not need to go into a class, for example, or a session or a seminar, but you pick up some of these skills by managing your learning yourself, by doing a PDP or a professional development plan, and you monitor that plan to be able to achieve those skills. Now, going further, we're going to look at in learning outcome 3 will be to come out, what are the various success factors which define leadership and management. So here we are going to be looking at slightly revisiting some of the things that we have studied in learning outcome 1 and 2. And the other will be to look at, how do leaders or people in the leadership and management position approach the development programs. There are terms that we normally come across when you look at people in the senior management, that they are being sent across for an executive program or a management executive program. They normally go across for a program to attend, to get some skills and qualifications eventually, and those are programs of shorter duration. You've come across maybe a word or a term which says mini MBA, or it talks about executive MBA. Now, a lot of people who have 20-25 years of experience, but when MBA was not as a qualification available, it was primarily down to their own experience, skills, and the experience of working within different organizations, that they had picked up these qualities and traits. And sometimes what organizations do is that they send these old hands or people with a lot of experience with working within the organization as sponsored candidates to be able to go and study a particular program. It could be a management program, it could be a development program, maybe in a specific department, engineering, manufacturing, whatever. But these programs tend to be what are called the executive learning or executive development programs. So we need to be able to understand why do people go into these programs, and at some stage, what is the relevance of these programs when we look at developing leadership and management within key people within the organization. So learning outcome actually tends to focus on something to do with understanding how this is taken forward, because you cannot have all the people in leadership position. You can have all the people gaining experience to get into leadership position, but sometimes you have to develop resources to be able to put them into leadership positions, and that is where the concept of evaluating these programs comes in. And we need to look at the kind of programs which people go into, so that they are able to further the development of these skills, these traits, and these qualifications, which actually helps them adapt to the leadership role. So I've put together a couple of slides, just to cover this learning outcome. And here the idea would be to dip into something like what we've studied, the management theories, the leadership theories, and the idea would be to try and understand how do we relate them to the development of leadership and management within organization. So let's go through some of the slides, and you can stop me and ask me questions where you feel there are things which are not clear. But let's look at some of the basic things of how do we look at some of the success indicators for leadership and management development. Okay. So start with a couple of things. There are some things which I put in the slides again just to refresh. Now, definition of management. There are loads of definitions, but specifically related to learning outcome 3, management would be nothing but all actions focused on accomplishing tasks. The key difference between a manager and leader is the managers are always focused on tasks, and the leaders are always focused on the long-term vision or the long-term direction of the company. So here the leadership would be the ability to be able to create an environment wherein people are able to follow you and they are able to achieve or relate to that sense of common vision or purpose within the organization. So some people, sometimes you see that you have a CEO briefing or annual training conferences which most companies hold now, which are basically to analyze how the performance was, what are the changes which are coming in the organization. And some of these conferences, you're invited to as an employee or as a staff to participate. And what they tend to do is the leaders or the people who are actually making presentations or responsible for setting the direction are actually given the opportunity to make presentation to the existing staff. And there, what they tend to do is they will talk about things which will be like a common thread, and everyone present in that conference or that meeting will be able to identify with that particular vision which the leader is actually, or the chief or the top person in the organization are actually putting forward. So managers focus on tasks, leaders focus on long-term vision. Now, when we look at these two, we also talk about competence and commitment. And there's a key difference between competence and commitment. Now, competence is defined as something wherein you have a knowledge and a skill to be able to do a job. Now, assuming you want to do some programming and you want to hire a person, you will hire a programmer who already has experience, knows the programming, and can come in and start the work pretty much. But here, you will not look at somebody who does not have experience in programming or working previously within the department or other companies, and you will not hire that person, because the hiring is primarily based on the fact that you're looking at competence. When you look at commitment, commitment comes from working within the organization. It could come in from experience, support, your package, your emoluments, as we call them, benefits that you get, and motivation, and how committed you are in your job role in the within the organization. So competence would be related to directly doing a job and having the skill or not having the skill. Commitment would be something which is qualitative, not quantitative. So that would mean that how much motivation, willingness, confidence you have to be able to do the job. Now, one of the key things which I would want you to do, if I have to say, let's do a personal check in terms of, as a leader, how would you reflect, as a leader? What do you think are the qualities that you have? What are the skills that you have? What are the traits or skills that you have? And why do you think you would make an effective leader? Now, this is something which is an exercise that we need to do, because we need to look at what are the success indicators of people who are in leadership and management position. So if we look at the learning outcome, it says analyze indicators of success and management that we need to know. So here, what you need to be able to do is understand and reflect on what your leadership style is first, right? And for that, you need to be able to identify what are your skills and what are your traits. So skills will be related to commitment or competence.
Okay.
I just talked about it. So skills will be related to competence, and when we talk about traits, they'll be related to your commitment. So here, what we want to do is, at some stage, if I have to take an example, you do this exercise after the session, but just to take an example, what we are looking at doing is we are trying to reflect on our own style of individual leadership. So what we have to do is think of a situation wherein you've actually stepped up to the role and you've shown a bit of leadership. That will be an example or a situation which will give you some idea to be able to do some analysis. So I can think of a situation from yesterday wherein obviously we had a visit from say external examiner. We had a number of students undergoing certification. So leadership would have meant that in my case I had to go down and obviously get into the nitty-gritty of looking at the scripts and marking the scripts, because we did not have enough time to be able to have other people involved in that situation. So the leadership was, I understood the gravity of the situation and got into it. That means I kind of digged my heels in because it was going to be a long night, and I started to get into marking and assessment. So here the situation talks about external examiner visit. It talks about what are the actions which could be taken to make it happen. Is that obviously all the scripts, everything has to be marked, has to be accurately checked and made ready for inspection. Now, what are the 3 words that you would want to describe in that situation? In my case, it was stress, but it could be other 3 words that we talk about, and these 3 words could be things like, you have to plan, you have to do, and you have to put, you have to take action. So sometimes you have to look at leadership in terms of breaking it down in terms of what all you had to achieve. So you might want to break it down into clear goals. And once you've looked at the clear goals, that, okay, I need to go through this, I have to then look at planning to be able to achieve that goal. And finally, you have to, complete that task to be able to achieve it. And that kind of helps me reflect on a couple of things in terms of what was the situation, what kind of action plan I put in place, and obviously how did I achieve that particular task. And that helps me understand the leadership. Now, because I got into it myself, I can relate it to the 3 or 4 types of leadership styles, which could be things like, if I needed help from other people, or if I had to delegate jobs to other members in my team, then it would have been a democratic or a laissez-faire style of leadership, or it could have been, a style which kind of relates to where you're delegating a few things in terms of jobs, and the final output of that you're managing and putting it across for final inspection. So here the idea would be to identify your skills.
Sorry. Yes, you said we have all types of leadership style.
Yes.
What I have here is 3. I know we have autocratic, we have democratic, and we have laissez-faire leadership style.
Yes.
Which is the 4th?
There are 4. So basically, you're looking at autocratic, bureaucratic, democratic, and laissez-faire. And laissez-faire. Okay.
Well, that should be 3 now.
That should be 3 or 4.
Laissez-faire leadership style.
But there are 4. So autocratic, bureaucratic, you have democratic, and
we have bureaucratic.
Yes. See, there are 2 types of classification that we can do here. Now, when you look at over the years, the basic 4 styles which had come across after a lot of research and research done by different psychologists and people, they were essentially identified as 4 leadership styles. But over the years, what has happened is that a lot of other styles have also come across in terms of its definition. So you also have styles like task-oriented leadership style. You also have something called people-oriented leadership style, and these styles have then been taken further into types: transformational and transactional. So you have transformational leadership when you come and change and revolutionize that role or that company, and transactional means you get on with running the day-to-day operations of the company, and that is where they have also been looked at as types of leadership styles. And then the modern day concept, which is currently being discussed and debated amongst a lot of people who are doing their research, are talking about 21st century leadership styles. What are the 21st century leadership styles? And the research currently and the studies are currently taking them beyond transformational and transactional, because leaders have to do pretty much everything. They have to be good managers. They have to be able to bring the team together. They have to have some elements of being a democratic leader. They have to be liked by people. They also have to be task oriented, because if you're not a good leader which can focus on tasks, then you're not able to get the output done. Or sometimes you're not able to employ managers which can get the output. So leadership styles have many connotations nowadays, and over the years, some of these styles have been expanded beyond the 4. And we can, I think, if I have to Google it up right now, probably there'll be 8 to 10 different styles which have come across. We could look at that, but you have to basically look at relating to anyone, and that can be done primarily on the basis of your traits and your skills. Okay. Now, if I look at, say, for example, a bit of a discussion, because we've looked at, say, the definition of management, looked at the definition of leadership, and I ask you to look at defining the two in your own terms, and then go back and look at picking up a situation wherein you have shown leadership. The idea would be to try and pick out on points which are going to be 3 things. One, what was the situation? How did you come out of that situation? And what were the key factors which kind of contributed in terms of you coming out of that situation? And it could be any situation, it could be a situation in the business, it could be a situation at home, it could be something which is you got into a bit of difficulty, but because you were in a bit of a difficulty, you had to come out of it, and you put a plan in place, you identified with a few factors, and those factors is what we want to be able to pick out. And they can only be picked out if you concentrate on something which is called identifying your traits and identifying something called skills. Now, just to refresh, we have covered traits and skills, but what are the traits which generally are recognized and related to being somebody who's a good leader? Some of the traits that we look at is they have a clarity on vision and purpose. When you look at the large companies which have become very, very large, successful businesses, you look at Microsoft, you look at Facebook, for example, you look at Google, for example. When you look at the people who started these companies, they have a very clear thought in terms of vision and purpose, why they created the company, what is the ethos, what is the raison d'etre, as we call it, the reason of existence. So Facebook's reason of existence was, Mark Zuckerberg thought of creating some sort of a service wherein they could network amongst other colleagues in the college when he was studying. So these are very clear indicators that we do get to see in people who are excellent leaders, that they have a clarity in terms of vision and purpose. They have very, very clear defined goals. They have a strong commitment about it. They are flexible to a certain extent. They do not compromise on those clarity in terms of the goals, but they are flexible. So over the years, when the business started, and he started Facebook in 2005, he's come a long way, but obviously what has happened over the years is he's been a bit more flexible to add services to Facebook, which has helped increase revenue for the company. It must have not been his initial philosophy to look at having services or, charging, the services in terms of when you use Facebook, and he's committed to that. He's always looked at other ways through which revenues can be generated to support the running of the service, which is coming in through advertising at this moment. But he has sought that Facebook will always be free. There will be no subscription charge to Facebook, and money will be made through advertising, other revenues, which other business models that they're doing. So they are flexible, but they're staying strong. He's staying strong with the commitment of keeping Facebook free rather than making it a paid subscription. Then they also have an understanding of change. If change is to be brought across, how it needs to be brought across, and why change is required at a certain point in time. They are very good listeners, or very good patient listeners, and then they are very confident. They are not averse to taking risks. These are some of the qualities that we recognize, traits within being somebody who is an excellent leader. There are also some other things that we can add to that equation is when we look at some of the managerial qualities and compare that to the traits which excellent leaders have. We could think about things like they have knowledge about the product, the service which the company stands for or is providing, and they have knowledge about each and every area of the operations of the organization. And this is the managerial hat which the leader is actually putting on. Now, managers are able to quickly learn from their mistakes. So are leaders, but this is a generic statement, but most leaders that you will see, they're able to learn from mistakes because they make it once and they do not repeat those mistakes. They are excellent. When I say they are very good patient listeners, they are also excellent communicators. That means they're able to set, how else do you expect they to set the vision and mission of the company if they do not have clarity themselves? So they have the ability to be able to articulate in clear terms what is required, and that is why they are also they also have something called the gift of the gap. That means they can communicate quite well, verbally, orally, literally, and written. Now, they are very good public speakers. Who do you see in speeches? Who do you see in big conferences? Who do you see? Do you see managers or do you see leaders? Who do you speak?
Conferences. You see leaders most times. But if need be, there are times you see managers too. If they need to present something as regards the organization, you see them representing the organization. But even when a company organizes, what did you call it now?
Let's say an event or an annual training event.
Like maybe a seminar or something or a workshop, you see them invite people who have kept a niche for themselves in the industry, leaders that people look up to. You see them invite them over to, speak on one or two things. Then maybe later the manager or the person overseeing the company can just come up stage to talk about the company for a bit, and that's about it.
That is correct. So basically, sometimes you will see people who have become leaders over the years have been very successful managers. They've been very good at managing things. They've been very good at managing resources. They've been very good at, managing and developing resources. So sometimes you will see the leader, the person who goes into a leadership position, has in the past been an excellent manager, or has been in the past a very good manager. Any job, any particular responsibility entrusted has been completed on time, and that person has been able to do it time and again, and that kind of tends to demonstrate that the person is also a excellent leader. They're quite resourceful. When you are getting into a leadership position, sometimes you see that people in the junior positions do not have that much of networking. They do not have that much of access to resources or knowledge available from other sources or avenues. So when you get to see that people, when they say leaders are like aged wine, is because what will happen is people who work 15, 20 years have made a lot of connections, a lot of relationships. And when you are at a position wherein you have to look at gathering information or looking at getting some data or getting some work done, sometimes for them it becomes easy. And we use the term resourceful is because they have connections in the right places to be able to get to those things more or less directly, as against going through somebody who's a novice or a learner. So a simple example is, if I ask you to fill up an application form, if you're doing it for the first time, you'll do a bit of research, find out, look at various things, ask a few people a question, a few people some questions, and then at some stage you will be able to fill the form up. Now that is to say that you fill that up, but it's not sure that you will end up filling it up perfectly well, have some mistakes or errors in it. But somebody who's done it time and again has the ability to be able to fill that up and knows the full process. But sometimes you will see that sometimes people will say, okay, I need to do this, but okay, I've got someone who can do this for me. So they are resourceful because they can get people to do the work for them. And because they have the experience to be able to review it, they then get the others to be able to do the work and, at some stage, then review it and submit it. So people in that position, when you reach a senior or higher up, you become resourceful because you've gone through the learning curve and you understand the various, requirements of why a work is to be done, how it's to be done, and how soon it can be done. Now, leaders are also realistic. That means they are, one of the slides did say that they're confident in taking risks. So when we looked at the example of, some companies, like when we talked about Facebook, let's talk about another company called Tesla. Now, if you look at the company called Tesla, Tesla is one of the pioneering companies from the Silicon Valley, which has created, electric cars. And Elon Musk, he's the chief executive of that company. Now, he is quite realistic in the sense that he wants to achieve something. But what he has done is he's put some realistic timelines to say that, okay, the initial cars that he introduced, which were all electric, battery powered, essentially are very expensive. So it's not a common man's car, it's a very expensive car. But I think about 3.5, 4 years back, he put together a plan and he said, okay, we do these many cars in terms of every year, and the average car price is about $120,000. But the car is, state of the art, has all the features that you expect, blah, blah, blah. But 3 years down the line, he said, okay, a lot of people had demand and, a demand for a cheaper Tesla car. and he then put a plan together to say that, okay, it's going to be realistically 5 years before Tesla can actually break even, and then produce a volume model, which is a Series 3, and that could be made available to the customers, who want to drive Tesla cars at around the price range of $30,000. Now, that is also not cheap, but realistic in the sense that he was quick to acknowledge that we are not a common man's car yet. It will be a 10-year journey for us to be able to transform what we've produced, created, into something which can be made realistic for common users to be able to afford and have those cars in 10 years' time. And in 5 years, he's put the Series 3 together, and that is why we would say that, as a leader, he's putting together plans which are realistic, achievable, and they go into that definition of something called being smart, which we know stands for, something which is specific, measurable, achievable, time-bound, and realistic.
Yes.
When they set these targets, to a certain extent, a manager sometimes could look at setting targets which are over-ambitious. But when you set targets as a leader, you seldom get to hear the word being over-ambitious. You do not hear the word he's an over-ambitious leader. You get to hear the word or the phrase which says over-ambitious manager. He's trying to achieve more than what he can actually do in that time frame. So realistic is a very important trait that we get to see in people who tend to be what you call, excellent leaders. Now, so let's look at one or two other key things which I want to just briefly talk about, and then we go into some of the other factors that we would want to, look at from a point of view of, what defines and how do we measure effective leadership? How do we measure effective management? Now, assuming you have a number of employees and you have a checklist, what you want to be able to do is you want to bring a checklist, in mind with a specific job that you want your employees to do. So what you tend to do is you ask 2 or 3 questions as an HR manager. One, how competent is that person to be able to, be given that job or to be able to do that job? And the second that you ask is, these are the 2 fundamental things which most HR managers start with: how competent you are and how committed you are. And every role, every job, every responsibility that you look at within the organization, sometimes you will see managers start with these 2 parameters: competency, and they look at commitment. So how competent you are and how committed you are to the organization, or how motivated you are to be able to do that job given the opportunity, to get into that particular role. And this is something which we see as practicality when we look at, if I give you an example, sometimes you see within large organizations, if they have vacancies which come in, wherein they have to take new employees on, what they do is they post these jobs in the company intranets, or they post the job into the company portal, so that employees who are working within the organization have the opportunity first to be able to apply to those roles. And this helps serve 2 purposes. One, you will see that the HR manager and they put some incentives. So, for example, if you refer a friend and we end up taking it, you get some referral fee of $500, or, say £500. In some companies, $200 or £2,000, whatever. But the idea is they put some incentive to it, and the main reason behind this is 2. One is the department or the HR manager, the company is actually looking at providing job rotation to its employees. So a lot of people who have been working within the role for a number of years, if they want to look at it, they are committed to the organization and they are competent, then the HR then looks at developing them into other positions of leadership and management by giving them this opportunity of applying for a role internally, right? And this then again looks at only 2 parameters: how committed you are to the organization and what is your competence to be able to do that role. So what they want to do, they want to save costs in the long run by avoiding recruitment and the process of recruitment and selection externally. But within the company, they also give this opportunity for the employees to apply into that role, is because it helps them do a process of job rotation. And that is basis the fact on 2 parameters: how competent you are and how committed you are to the organization. Is that okay?
Okay.
Right. Now, let's look at a few questions. Let's check in terms of what we've looked at so far. Now, if I have to look at asking you this question, say, Avianca is a new employee in my team, and she's been anxious to join, the course why you are in this position, and this position is just opened up. So look at this as a situation that you are trying to apply for a role, and you are quite excited about it, and this role has just come up on the company portal. Now, would you define this as commitment, or would you define this as competence? How would you choose? Would you choose it from a point of view of your competence, or would you choose it from a point of view of your commitment to the organization?
Since she's a new employee on the team, you cannot ascertain if she's competent enough because she's new. So I will base that on commitment. If she's anxious, you said she has been anxious, which means she really wants to try. So that's commitment.
That is correct. So very good analysis. That here, if I just go back to the few slides that we discussed, and we discussed the situation, we were looking at picking up on leadership traits, and those traits, because she's a new employee, is focused on commitment, because you haven't tested the competence. Good. Let's look at another one. A senior member of the staff works well on her own. She knows just what to do at the right time. She helps others learn and adds to the success of the team. So is this competence or is this commitment?
This is competence.
That is correct. So self-explanatory, because she's worked in the company for a number of years.
Yes. She wants
the overall. Correct. Let's look at another one. So Connie worked in the company for 6 months. She's able to do some work well, but seems to be down. Seems that the work she does is down to herself. There is no help that she gets, but she's not looking at learning everything quickly enough. What would you say? This is commitment or competence?
Okay, you said she's worked for the company for about 6 months, and she's able to do some of the work well, but seems to be down on herself about not learning everything quickly enough. Okay, now the thing is, she's been in the system for like 6 months, and she's able to do some work well, which means she's excellent in some particular task. However, she's failing in some other part. She's competent enough to excel at some task. She can do something well, but she's not able to do everything. So she's competent at some point. Maybe she feels, I think it's competence, but if she's not doing it well,
it is competence.
And she's not confident enough about herself, that I think it's competence, if you'd ask me.
It is competence, yes, because she's been on board for 6 months, and because she's not learning herself quickly, and she is able to do some things. Obviously, it signifies competence. Let's look at another one. Sabrina knows the ropes of her work. That means she knows her work quite well. She can manage all the tasks, but sometimes she doesn't think she can really make things happen. Is this commitment or competence?
It's competence.
That is correct. So basically, no, it is no. But sometimes she doesn't think she can really make things happen.
Now, the thing is that sometimes she doesn't think she can really make things happen. Now, it has to do with confidence. It has to be with your self-confidence. You're not confident enough about your competence, and so, as such, you feel you're not good enough at some things, and you just want to shrink into your shell, like, maybe I'm not doing it right. It's not like she doesn't know the work, because she can manage all the tasks. But sometimes she doesn't think she can really make things happen because she's not confident enough in herself. But she's competent.
I know she's competent, but because the last line, if you read, she doesn't think she can make things happen. So this is a balance between 50-50. But I think when you look at, she can manage all the tasks. That means she has competence, no doubt. But sometimes, when it says but, sometimes she doesn't think she can really make things happen. It's to do with commitment. So if I just read this alone, she can manage all the tasks. That means she's competent. But when I add this to the equation, but sometimes she doesn't think she can really make things happen. That means there's a bit of a reflection on, she can sometimes feel insecure or not confident enough to be able to make the difference. And that is where it becomes a question mark in terms of her commitment.
Okay.
Right? Because sometimes what happens is people within the organization, when they're given a job or they're given a particular role to do, they can finish the job pretty much. But what they tend to don't do is then think beyond why they were given this role. They do not become proactive. They remain reactive. So if I've given a job, I'll do it. If I'm not being given a job, I will not participate. So if they've asked me to volunteer, I'm not going to volunteer unless somebody is going to ask me. So here the commitment is not there. That means the person is not willing to take proactive approach, and in turn, they are looking at taking a reactive approach. So it basically looks at the commitment. Now, sometimes you have to define between the two. Your employees are competent or commitment. You can't have both. Sometimes you can say both. Yes, they're competent and commitment, but you have to have a very fine line when you look at. Why I'm asking you these questions is we need to know very clearly as an HR manager when you have to take a call that okay, your organization has decided to make 200 people redundant or 20 people redundant. What will the basic criteria be to look at the call? The criteria will be you look at competence, which is required always on a day-to-day basis to achieve tasks, to achieve the revenue, to achieve the goals and objectives, and then what you look at is commitment. You will also look at both for certain people like, okay, I've had this employee for 25 years, he's made his mark, he's been good with the organization, we've achieved quite a lot, but going further, I don't think we need the skills and the trade that he has, and his time is kind of up. Now, you would say that his job is conventional. He's going to get some gratuity from the government because he's worked for, not the government, sorry, the organization, because he's worked for a number of years, and you do not have any questions on his commitment because the employee has stayed with you for the company and the organization for 25 years. But you then tend to solely look at his competence because after 25 years, you say, okay, what else can he do? He's been in this role, this role, this role, this role. And if you have to look at comparing him with another employee who is 5 years or so in the organization and is willing and is growing and is showing a lot of competence and commitment, you then tend to pick him up, not to make redundant, but the other guy tends to go. Isn't it? Sometimes as an HR manager, you have to make that decision. Okay, I think his time in the organization is up. He's contributed enough. Not that I have any bias for any discrimination, but if I have to pick between the two, what you will pick at that stage will be more of competence than commitment because you want the organization going forward. You want the goals to be met. Correct? Okay. But in some cases, you will end up doing both competence and commitment as an HR manager. An employee who's 10 years or so in the organization is in the leadership role, he's very performing, he's meeting all the targets year on year. And when it comes to a situation when you are having redundancies, you don't let that employee go because you can see both commitment and competence within that. And you can say that he's got a number of years, he's got few more years in him, for us to be able to, take some output from him. And what you have to do is then you do not choose between the two, but you end up looking at both commitment and competence, for that employee. Okay. Okay.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. For instance, if you are a manager in an organization, and of course you have people who are competent to do their jobs with little or no supervision. However, there's someone who is always willing to take up challenges. Like when you throw a task at people, people tend to hide until you delegate. You understand? I don't know if you understand that, until you delegate before people take up jobs. But in this situation, maybe you have a task and you just put it open to the house, and this person is always willing. Like I could try. Not like the person really knows the job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the person is, committed to trying. And, when the person tries, you supervise, you correct and everything. Now, if it's time to, make people redundant, would you consider the person's commitment to make the person stay? Not that the person is competent 100%. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying.
See, I've understood what you're saying. So sometimes the precise reason why
you find people like that in organizations that they're always willing, like I could try, not really like they know it. They're new in the system, they don't really know it, but they take up the challenges. They try to do what you want them to do. Then you can, supervise them, correct them, do it this way, do it that way.
See, in my case, the only thing that I would say, the word that because you're in try, that means the person is proactive, willing to take initiative, but does not clearly give me the confirmation that the person has competence. There are people in the organization who love challenges. They are willing to accept any challenge. They are willing to take it up as a challenge. But that taking up as a challenge is different from somebody who has been in that position, knows how to get the work done and get the work done first time right without committing mistakes. So if as an HR manager, you have to be clinical. That means you have to take a 0 and 1 decision, binary decision, 0 or 1. Then you have to look at choosing competence because you're choosing somebody to remain in that role. And in that role, you need somebody who can come in, who can stay in that role, perform day in, day out. And that is where you choose competence first, because that is what your requirement is, because of the way you asked me the question. But if you are telling me that, the person is proactive, the person is willing to take up a challenge and has been given the opportunity to take up certain challenges in the future wherein the person has been successful, and when a new opportunity comes, then the management has to think of 2 things, commitment or competence. They know that if they give this challenge to this person, might be a salary increase, might be a raise or a promotion. Now, in that case or that situation, it's not just going to be competence that you will take a decision on, but you will also look at a commitment clause, which will be 50% or more, because you're looking at promoting somebody else in the somebody amongst the others in the organization, which at some stage will have a bit of a kind of knock-on effect on others, because when you look at a promotion or when you look at an incentive which is being given, there is a sense of comparison which tends to happen. And because you're qualified for that promotion, that has not happened primarily on commitment, that's happened on your competence. But when you are getting promoted, the question of how committed you are to the organization and will you continue to contribute to the organization, in that case, commitment becomes important. So commitment becomes a factor in taking that decision when you are an HR manager.
Okay, so what you're saying now is when it comes to, streamlining the organization's workforce, it's important you focus on competence.
Correct. In today's modern context, when you look at,
then if it's that of promotion, you can, focus on commitment, how committed the person is to the organization. So the person can be promoted based on commitment.
Not solely on the basis of commitment, but competence and commitment. Because then you have to go a step further. You're looking at promoting somebody in the organization, and here you're looking at taking a decision partly on the basis of competence, because the person is better than the others or is able to perform, regularly on the targets or goals set. But at the same time, is also showing long-term commitment to stay within the organization.
Okay.
So you have to get a balance, but sometimes you have to, for junior roles, for example, let's, if you're hiring a receptionist, for example, in the office, or you're hiring an administrator in the office or an counselor in the office, you are looking at competence straight away. But the moment you say I'm hiring somebody that I'm going to look at developing that into a senior position, somebody who's going to be a financial controller one day, then what you will also look at some stage will be after the initial probation period is over, you look at the competence and you look at how committed the person is. So you give them a bit of a raise, you give them a bit of incentives, some targets, some bonus, and you keep checking the commitment of that employee to work within the organization. And that commitment that at some stage complements competence, which allows the person to move into a senior role.
Okay.
Now, let's look at some of the modern leadership styles. We've talked about the old ones, autocratic, democratic, bureaucratic, laissez-faire. Let's look at some of the modern leadership styles. The modern leadership styles talk about a directing leader, because you're not a political leader. You're not looking at leadership from a political context. You're looking at an organizational leadership. So here you're looking at task orientation. You're looking at somebody who becomes a leader and is classified as a directing leader because they're able to set clear goals, which are yearly, 6 monthly, quarterly. They're able to identify problems, come up with solutions. You're looking at somebody who's able to take a decision and can quickly take a decision without prolonging it, so that it doesn't cost the company in terms of resources or money. You are able to pick up somebody who's a directing leader who is basically very specific. It's not generalistic. You are able to give specific solutions, specific answers. And you will also look at a person who is a direct leader, if he or she is able to work and closely supervise and evaluate employee performance. So here you will normally see a good example would be small organizations where you have the owner, manager, or the director of the organization also being the HRI, and he's able to closely monitor employees, set targets, make the decisions, and that if there's a problem, he also comes with the solutions. And that is where you get to see the directing style of leadership. Okay?
Okay.
Let's look at coaching style. Now, coaching style means you are in a mid-size or a fairly good-sized organization where you're able to set goals, you step back slightly from doing the day-to-day operational role, you're able to identify problems, give solutions, but in some cases you're able to delegate the decision-making which is required on a day-to-day basis. Like sometimes you'll see in organizations there is a petty cash box. That means you want to buy some stationery or buy some, pay for the taxi or, buy a lunch for the visitor. You have a petty cash box which is there in the organization. And sometimes senior manager or a manager does not need to interfere. If you have a guest which is coming in and you need to take him out for lunch, you charge it from the petty cash. And that is where the coaching leader kind of style comes in, wherein all major decisions, are done at a higher level, but at some stage the decision-making process is made clear to the employees so that if they have the opportunity or have to take decisions in the absence of the main person, they are able to take decisions on their own. And here, the employees are more involved, just like the democratic style, in the decision-making process as far as the organization is concerned. Now, the supporting leader. Here, what we totally see is that the employees are involved in problem solving and goal setting. That means if you set an organization, you see something which is a large business, and that business is basically looking at growing year on year. It has gone beyond the number of employees. Just as an example, you look at a big company with more than 250 employees. Every year, the employee, they understand the business needs to grow, company needs to get more market share. So there's a self-awareness amongst a lot of people, and here the leadership style tends to be supporting. That means the leader will set the broad goals and then have the employees participate in doing and identifying the those broad goals into smaller goals. So they look at both in terms of problem solving and as well as goal setting. They also look at proactively solving problems, as a collective. And last but not least, sometimes you will see that here the employees, also listen to when certain decisions are taken and they are not agreeing with those decisions. So they are supportive of, the employer and the position of the employer in the organization. And as a key member of the team, they are engaged actively in making decisions and solving issues. Okay, this is like laissez-faire, more or less like laissez-faire style. And the last one is delegating. So this is laissez-faire, not supporting, but this is laissez-faire, wherein it relates to that the leader leaves everything down to the employees. He believes in total delegation. So what he does is he delegates and he says, if you have a problem, come up with a solution. He asks the employees, the staff to set goals, and then set real goals which are realistic, and you have to achieve them. So I could say in a position that we need to achieve this much, as in the organization, because we have expenses to pay. So if you don't do this, then obviously there is no job or there is no role. So here the dealing is primarily from a point of view of explaining the pros and cons, the advantages and disadvantages, and make the employees more self-aware that if they do not do this, then this cannot happen, or if they do this, this can happen. And here the employees take up more responsibility and the credit for work which is accomplished as against employers themselves. Okay.
Okay.
Let's look at doing another few quick checks. Now, we have a new employee in the team, and then he has been anxious to take the job and position which is open up. We discussed that it was more to do with competence, more to do with commitment rather than competence. What kind of leadership style do you think she had? Delegating, supporting, coaching, or directing?
I think it's supporting leader.
Because she's anxious to take the role. See, it could be supporting. It could be because she's anxious to join.
So she takes the lead in defining and support. Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, since she's always anxious to join, she's anxious to join you for a while, but this position just opened. Now, people like this in supporting leaders, they take the lead in defining how to do a job or solve a problem. Since she's always anxious to try that, I think she's a supporting leader.
Okay, so if you change the context now to competence and then define the leadership style, then competence will lead to either coaching or competence will lead to either directing.
Delegating.
Yeah, delegating. So if
Delegating